In 2006, Fally Ipupa, who had just exited the group Quartier Latin, released his first solo album, named Droit Chemin. The album contained a song named Ma Belle. That song is particularly striking. For the first 2 minutes or so, he sings about his despair and occasionally throws some shoutouts here and there. But for the last 4 minutes, he cuts the storyline and doesn't sing anything other than people's names, which is not always enjoyable when you're trying to remember the lyrics of a song. It is pretty common for Congolese songs to contain a lot of shoutouts. People who have listened to a modern Rumba song are often surprised by the amount of names that are being cited, and many have rightly guessed that they do so partly for commercial reasons. But what if I told you that there was more to it? What if there was more to that culture than just money? In this video, I will try to link the shoutout culture to some ancestral practices of the Bantu people. So hello, welcome to the Botengu channel. I use this channel to show videos about music theory, others with myself playing music, and I also like to make small documentaries on African music. You can like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. A shoutout is the action of acknowledging a real person by citing the name of that person in the song. It's frequent in music made by Afro descendants. In rap songs, for example, rappers often give shout out to their friends, dead or alive, their producers, and others. The purpose of a shout out can range from promoting a person to an organization, either because you want to thank that person or organization, or because you expect something in return. When I mention shout outs, I talk about all types of mentions. Promoting a new business, promoting a political party, shouting out the name of a rich athlete, mentioning your friend or the producer, mentioning the name of the guitarist, dedicating the song to your spouse, etc. A shoutout in Lingala is called libanga, which literally means stone. The plural is mabanga. There are two potential origins for the name stone. Either the names are thrown in the song like stones, or stones are thrown to get the attention of potential sponsors. It is important to understand that there are two types of shoutouts. There are the minor shoutouts, when the name is just mentioned, and then there are major shoutouts, where the whole purpose of the song is to praise that person. The video will be structured the following way. First, we will go over the history of shoutouts. Then, we'll go over their meaning, or symbolism, and finally, we will discuss the impact. History. I will go over the different periods of the musical style, and for each of those periods, I will discuss the state of the industry, the types of major shoutouts, and the types of minor shoutouts. The 60s. The Belgian Congo, as it was called, had an appropriate musical infrastructure. Europeans were usually the ones owning and managing the labels, and musicians could make a decent living with their music. In terms of shoutouts, the major ones were usually given to women in the lives of the musicians, similar to what is done in the rest of the world. It was not comparable to what would be done later on. There were some rare mentions of brands here and there, as the one given by Negro Succès to a company making soap named Astral. Independence Chacha has one of the earliest mention of politicians. Lumumba and Grand Calais were friends, and the song was celebrating the independence. It is thus natural to believe that those shoutouts came from a state of genuine patriotism and love rather than from a commercial reason. The 70s. The 70s were different. By that time, Mobutu had already taken the power and was about to impose his program of authenticity. That program consisted of making the newly rebaptized country Zaire free of all colonial influences. The foreigners who owned the labels were sent off and replaced by locals. Those locals did not have the same experience and context, which was reflected in the mismanagement of the companies. The political shoutouts became more frequent, but they seemed less genuine. Franco sang Authenticité dans Congrès, where he promoted and praised Mobutu's political party. The animation politique was established where Mobutu was praised by traditional choirs. When it came to the minor shoutouts, it became more and more frequent for singers to sing their names, mention the other members of their bands, and people from the entourage as well. That particular habit set the foundation for what was about to become frequent during the next decade. The 80s. During the 80s, most industries were mismanaged and faced rampant corruption. The music industry was not spared. On top of that, the rise of cassette tapes, which replaced the vinyl format worldwide, was easier to pirate. That very same piracy trend decreased the profits and thus the amount of money that the artist made. There was also a lack of solid institution to protect the artist's rights. The shoutout started becoming an interesting source of money. When it came to the major shoutouts, the 70s had taught the musicians how to praise a leader, and they applied that very same mentality to start praising brands, politicians, businessmen, sapeurs, and most notably, beer companies like Skol and Primus. When it came to the minor shoutouts, the entourage being cited got larger, and it became more unclear from an external point of view whether the person mentioned was a musician, a member of the band's entourage, or a random person who just wanted his or her name immortalized. The 90s. In the 90s, that trend continued. The CDs would replace the cassette, but the piracy would continue. The Vive Editions, one of the biggest record label in Kinshasa, would encounter financial problem in the 80s, pushing new groups to go to Europe in order to record. The end of the 80s had seen the group Wenge Musica emerge. Despite their ability to set the ambiance, the group will be remembered for having almost single-handedly contributed to the complete drowning of lyrics through their shoutouts. Despite the political turmoil and the regime change witnessed in the late 90s, the musicians of DRC, as the country was going to be rebaptized, kept the same mentality and praised whoever had the power and whoever had the money. That trend also continued and grown to this day. Symbolism. Now, the two types of libanga, or shoutouts, did not come out of the blue. I believe that they are rooted in deeper practices that take place in Africa. First, there is the practice of worship. In pre-colonial sub-Saharan Africa, the chants used to be sung as a way of praising local divinities, or important people. The very same types of chant were then hijacked by Mobutu. His idea of going back to the roots was not only a way of giving the Zairians an identity, it was also a clever way of consolidating his power. Traditional chiefs are not limited by democracy. Hence, if Zaire becomes a traditional village, then Mobutu is enthroned as its chief until his death. The animation politique then influenced popular music, and musicians used the praising characteristic of ancestral rhythm to praise whoever was willing to pay. Secondly, there is a social inclusiveness. It is part of human nature to want to feel included and to be part of a movement. But the industrialization of the West, and more of the East, has promoted individualism. African traditions are often about inclusion and making sure everybody has their place. Ray Lema was appointed director of the Zaire National Dance Company in the 70s, and he got the opportunity to travel the country and discover more about that specific traditional perspective on music.
They don't think music, they think it's a social game where every member of the tribe has a place of his own, and that's the purpose of the game, to find one's place in the society.
When we take that into consideration while analyzing the shoutouts culture, maybe it could be that the people requesting minor shoutouts are simply trying to find their place in the huge world that is popular music, and musicians are simply selling them that opportunity. Impact. Now, obviously, shoutouts have huge impact on the industry. First, it is often lucrative for the symbolic reason mentioned above. Huge stars can often get up to $5,000 for shouting one name. Songs can easily have dozens of names. Another interesting aspect of the shoutouts is that sometimes they are done in a stylish way and they become part of the culture. It is an example of how the Congolese musicians have been able to make a constraint stylish. The singer Maître Gims, in his song Sapé comme jamais, mentions the name of the people in his entourage, not for money, but simply to pay tribute to the sapeur culture and the rumba music. When done right, shoutouts can also be enjoyable, as it is shown in the song Trahison, sang by Pepe Kale and written by Simaro.
olakisi ngai infidélité lelo na poshe nanga lobi ya Beverly lobi na poshe ya Teddy Kinzala lobi kuna na poshe ya Vangu Pezo lobi kuna na poshe ya Kimayolas ekosuka na poshe ya Pepe Kale na mema.
However, the culture of shoutouts often has disadvantages. As mentioned before, shoutouts can often drown the message of a song. It makes singer lazy from an artistic perspective. There is no point in writing a lot. The shoutouts fill out the space pretty well. The other issue is that it highlights the vulnerability of the musicians. The days of independence cha-cha are far behind, and nowadays, musicians will sing for anybody who pays them, which is one of the reasons why a new wave of protesters called les combattants has risen in Europe. Also, there has been an increasing wealth inequality within the bands. Since instrumentalists do not sing, they cannot do shoutouts. Hence, they are often neglected, and it becomes harder for them to make a living in the music industry. To conclude, shoutouts are an integral part of modern Rumba music. They are a good example of the commercialization of traditional practices or philosophies. They became commercialized because of the lack of revenue in the music industry. Although Rumba shoutouts have roots in traditional philosophies, as far as in the way they are practiced, it is pretty frequent even in other industries. For example, social media is a good case study to understand how free content quickly becomes filled with ads.